Now, in this lecture video, we'll look at the last two assumptions that we require in order to understand international trade model. And the first assumption for this lecture video, or the sixth assumption that we require in order to understand international trade is as follows, and that is factors of production are perfectly mobile across sectors within a country and are perfectly immobile across countries. Now, if factors of production like workers, machines, and so on can move from one sector or one industry to another, in that case, the wages, the rent, and so on, they will be the same in different industries within a country. For example, for some reason, suppose the wages in the food industries are much higher than what they are for clothing. In such a case, what workers in clothing industry will do is they'll move to the food industry. And as more and more workers move to the food industry, the wages in the food industry will start coming down. And what will happen to clothing industry where workers are leaving? The wages are likely to rise, and eventually what will happen is same wages will prevail in different sectors or industries within a country. But if factors of production cannot move across countries, that's what we have assumed, so there's no possibility of labor migration or machines moving from one country to another. In such a case, different wages will prevail across countries. So what this assumption does is, and it ensures that the wages are the same across industries within a country, and these can be different across countries. The last assumption we make, assumption 7, is that perfect competition prevails in both goods and factor markets. Now, what is perfect competition? This is something you must have studied in your principles of microeconomics. And let me quickly go over the conditions for perfect competition. The first assumption we make is a standard one, and we have used it all along, and that is we assume economic agents are rational and have perfect knowledge, and you already know the meaning of rationality and perfect knowledge. The second assumption we make, and this is a critical one or a crucial one, and that is there are very large number of very small economic agents. And when we use the term economic agents, what we have in mind are sellers and consumers. So each one of them, we have a large number of sellers and there are a large number of consumers, and each one of them is very small in relation to the larger market. And when we assume this, what this means is each economic agent becomes a price taker. That is, as an economic agent who's very small in relation to the market cannot influence the price or cannot negotiate the price. For example, when I walk into Walmart, I'm very small in relation to Walmart, and whatever price is set by Walmart, I take that as given and try to do the best I can. I cannot negotiate a price with Walmart. So this is what we assume, and this is what this assumption implies. That is, each economic agent, whether this economic agent is a consumer or a producer, this person is a price taker. The third assumption we make is called homogeneous products. That means different sellers sell exactly the same product to different consumers, and this is very relevant from the perspective of consumers. Consumers believe that irrespective of who sells it, it is the same product. So this is the third assumption. The fourth assumption we make under perfect competition is called free entry, free exit. Remember, we are looking at a market where we have very large number of very small producers and consumers. or we are looking at teeny tiny businesses, and we assume that it is costless for anyone in a legal or a financial sense to start a business, and again it is possible for anyone in a financial or legal sense to quit business. So these are the four assumptions we require in order to understand perfect competition, or these assumptions give rise to perfect competition kind of market situation. Once again, these are rationality and perfect knowledge. Number two, each economic agent is a price taker. Number three, different sellers sell exactly the same product, particularly from the perspective of consumers. And we assume there is free entry, free exit. Now, when we have perfect competition, what will eventually happen is the following, and that is price will equal the marginal cost of production, and this happens when we have perfect competition. We know what is price. Price is price of one unit, for example, of clothing. What is marginal cost? Marginal cost is the cost of producing that unit of clothing. So when you have competition, what is going to happen is whatever it costs you to produce that particular unit of output, you will charge a price which equals that. And what is the formal definition of marginal cost? Marginal cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of output, marginal cost. And so this is what we require. Price of one unit of clothing or one item that you're looking at must equal the cost of producing that particular unit of that item, and in this case, clothing. In the previous slide, I tried to emphasize the point. When we have perfect competition-like situation, the price charged by sellers in a way collapses to or becomes equal to the cost of producing it, something we have called marginal cost. Now, let us try to understand this in a framework that we will use in international trade. And let's keep our analysis very simple, and that is, let us assume that labor is the only factor of production. You require only workers to produce clothing as well as food. You do not require anything else. And suppose these numbers are known to us. Let's call this ALC, and ALC represents the number of workers required to produce one unit of clothing. And let us assume we require 10 workers to produce one unit of clothing. In a similar way, we also know ALF, and ALF stands for number of workers required to produce one unit of food. And let us assume this to be 5, that is, we require 5 workers to produce one unit of food and 10 workers to produce one unit of clothing. And let W, small w, represent the wage rate that is paid to each worker. And let us assume this is $5. So each worker is paid $5. And look at the clothing example. You require 10 workers to produce one unit of clothing, and each worker is paid $5. So what will be the cost of producing one unit of clothing? It will be 5 times 10, which will be $50. And how do we know this? This is wages, which is $5, times the number of workers required to produce one unit of clothing. And this will be the cost of producing one unit of clothing. Let's do the same thing for food. Each worker is still paid $5, and we require 5 workers to produce one unit of food. So what will be the cost of one unit of food? It will be 25. And how do we get this number? It is wages times number of workers required to produce one unit of food. So this is how we can calculate the cost of producing one unit of food as well as 1 unit of clothing. Now let PC represent price per unit of clothing. And when we have perfect competition, we know price must equal the cost of producing that unit, or in other words, this must be true. Wages times ALC will equal PC. And let PF represent the price per unit of food, and so this must be true as well. So this is something you should remember. Now what we have established is that under perfect competition, price will equal marginal cost of production or the cost of producing that good. That's what perfect competition does. It forces the price to become equal to the cost of producing it. And when we assume labor is the only input, we know price of clothing will be wages times ALC. And once again, what is ALC? It's the amount of labor or workers required to produce 1 unit of clothing. And in a similar way, PF will equal wages times ALF. Now let us divide PC by PF, and we have wages in the numerator as well as denominator, and we can cancel out the common term, and what will be left with is this ratio. PC by PF is also called relative price of clothing, and what will this be? It will be number of workers required to produce 1 unit of clothing divided by number of workers required to produce 1 unit of food. Now based on the numbers I had used on the previous slide, we know ALC is 10 and ALF is 5 and wages is $5, and we do not need the information about wages to calculate relative price of clothing. So what will be relative price of clothing? It will be twice as high as that of food. Why? Because we require twice as many workers to produce clothing relative to food. So this is how we determine relative price of clothing. And what will be relative price of food? It will be PF by PC, and this will be ALF divided by ALC. And in terms of these numbers we have, this will equal 1/2. So food will be 1/2 times the price of clothing, or the price of food will be half as that of clothing. Now based on these numbers we have on ALC and ALF, we should be able to calculate productivity. And what is productivity per worker in clothing? This will be output of clothing produced per worker, or therefore it will be 1 divided by ALC. That will give us productivity of worker in clothing. In a similar way, we can figure out productivity of worker in food, output of food produced per worker, and this will be 1 divided by ALF. And this completes our discussion about the last assumption. Here is a list of assumptions that we have made in several lecture videos. You should know each of these assumptions, and you should also know the concepts behind each of these assumptions, because this will help you understand international trade models and appreciate the richness of these models. Thank you for your time.